Simon, out of all the wacky batshit ideas humanity has come up with in the past, 10,000 years, why do you think Marxism has persisted so much?
Because it's true.
Well, you can't just say because.
No, I'm kidding. But I mean, it's okay. What do you think Marxism means? I mean, what do you mean by that? I mean, Marx invented a way of historical materialism is a way of, an encompassing way of understanding the world, and what we call Marxism today. I mean, I'm not an economist, I'm not a historian, I'm not a sociologist. I'm just some dude who tweets sometimes to my 5 followers. But historical materialism is a totalizing way of looking at the world. It has incredible predictive power, explanatory power. It offers incredibly profound insights into the way the world works. It offers consolation also. Why wouldn't it be persistent?
Well, basically, history is just about oppressor and oppressor throughout the centuries and millennia.
What do you mean? Are you saying history?
Marxist dialectical materialism.
That's incredible. That reductive.
It's extremely simplistic. But
I mean, we're talking about Marxism, historical materialism as a methodology. I mean, methodology that has been used in historical scholarship, sociology. What? I mean, do you mean as a kind of academic methodology? Do you mean the kind of, just class struggle as a slogan? I mean,
yeah. Let's talk about class struggle as a slogan, really.
Oh, but that's a different question altogether. If you're asking why class struggle still appeals to ordinary people, because it exists as a reality because people are because capitalism is oppressive. I mean that seems to be the obvious and good answer to that question. I mean,
well, okay, so let's take socialism in its theoretical form.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What does it hope to achieve, and how will it hope to achieve it?
I mean, so again, I'm not like a representative of
sure.
Democratic Socialists of South Africa, or even like an historian. I would say one way of describing the end goal of socialism is individual liberation of humans. I mean that's basically what it is. From liberation of humankind.
From what exactly?
From all kinds of oppression, but certainly the kind of oppressive. The oppressive forces of capitalism. Basically, I mean that's a very reductive. That's the kind of slogan on the side of a bus answer, but that's the answer.
All right, but I mean capitalism is what 250 years old, somewhere around there.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, so Marx would have sees the bourgeois as a kind of ultimately, he admires their energy probably more than most.
Like, he had good things to say about capitalism. He was actually his musings on capitalism are very interesting.
Well, I mean,
he does pick out the frailties within it.
Well, I mean, it's all about contradictions within. I mean, Marx is not just some dude who's like, unlike today's Twitter right. I mean, Marx actually took a very careful look at what he was critiquing. I mean, he had to fully absorb neoclassical economics, in order to kind of critique it. I mean, E.P. Thompson says almost too much, that it was kind of that he absorbed this text to the point that he was almost kind of contaminated by it. But
right, because I mean, from my worldview, I mean, I used to be a bit libertarian, not anymore, but I do think freedom is the ability to trade with other people, and providing value to others, and products and services to others, and being employed is part of a system which is, because I think employment is the big obstacle, right? In socialism, in the way socialists think of the world, employment is like sort of a fine line between that and slavery, I would suspect.
Well, I mean, Marx envisioned. I mean, I don't know. Again, I'm not like a Marx scholar, but Marx and socialists and socialists throughout time have envisioned the idea that communist utopia is not a world without work. Necessarily. I mean, the idea is that work is productive. I mean, Marx worked himself to death. I mean, it's
really. But all the right-wing literature I read was that he was a layabout who just like stayed at home and what's his name?
Engels.
Yeah, Engels supported him throughout his life.
Yeah, he wasn't working at Goldman Sachs. I mean, he worked harder than. I mean, Marx was a workaholic.
Right.
Okay. And his family had to suffer. I mean, his family lived in extreme poverty.
Yeah.
His children, like
millions of others at the time in England, right?
Yeah, but what I'm saying is he wasn't just off slacking all day. He was working non-stop. He was working on his research. He was part of, he was an active, he was part of the socialist. This is not, this is, Marx was the opposite of slacker. He was an absolute workaholic.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I was talking about my worldview. So my worldview is that, you create value and goods and services to other people. That requires capital, requires labor.
Yeah.
And ideally, that trade will enrich everyone within it.
Okay, but does it?
Well, that's the question, isn't it?
Well,
so now, what are your objections to that?
Well, the fact that it doesn't. I mean, there's all kinds of cultural objections one might make also. Like deadening effects of, dare I say it, neoliberalism, late capitalism. But just from a, and these are, you're not going to find critiques of neoliberalism in capital. I mean, like when we talk about Marxism, what are we talking about also? We're talking about Western communism. We're talking about all these various iterations of Marxist thought throughout the ages, other kinds of socialist thought. But at basic level, I mean, the worker relationship is exploitative. That's the basic idea. And I think, clearly, I mean, I believe that it is. Okay. But also, you can talk about the great poverty alleviation that kind of has happened in the last, half century.
Yeah.
But if you think that capitalism ultimately is immiserating, then you have to look at other ways that, that are more kind of can precipitate human flourishing. But I mean, also, when we talk about contemporary Marxist thought, I mean, look at the explanatory power of people influenced by, I mean, I think, like, look at 2008, for example. I mean, there were critiques that came from outside of mainstream, the mainstream kind of commentaries. So, libertarian, I think there's some interesting libertarian critiques. A lot of it, I think, is nonsense, but at least they took a kind of holistic picture. But when you look at people like Robert Brenner, you look at Giovanni Arrighi, I mean, these are much richer, much more prescient and perceptive explanations of the crises of capitalism, and whether and they anticipated many of the crises that continue to occur.
So can you give just a diluted version of their argument, like the enveloping argument, if possible?
No.
Can you
like Robert Brenner, for example, would talk about the tendency of, it goes back to Marx's concern with the tendency of the rate of profit to fall. I don't think that's, I mean, it's complicated. This stuff is complicated. I mean, these are not things that can be reduced to sound bites, but it's, I mean, a lot of people will talk about how the securitization that we saw that kind of precipitated 2008 was not just contingent. That this is something that's almost kind of built into an empire at the end of its, a capitalist empire at the end of its kind of,
okay.
The late stage when kind of contradictions amass to the point where it's kind of unsustainable. We can. My argument is not that I have the key, that they exist like the one simple solution. These are very complicated, and you'll find, within Marxist and left-wing and socialist economists, you'll find, obviously disputes, and historians. You're not going to find one. This isn't like just a blog post about finding the right slogan to explain everything. But I'm saying these explanations have, as far as I'm concerned, greater explanatory force than rival explanations. So this may have been a kind of complex way of evading your question, but what was the question?
Well, basically, how is capitalism? Because, I mean, here's the difference. Mm-hmm. I like the free market.
Okay, but what do you mean? Do you like free? Do you like personal autonomy?
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
I mean, and there's all kinds of ways that we don't feel autonomous, and we're in exploitative labor relations.
Yeah.
You're not autonomous without money. You're not autonomous in all kinds of ways. You're subject to all kinds of rules and strictures. I don't feel very, and that may be okay. So it's also complicated. I say I don't feel free. I don't feel kind of flourishing. That's a kind of almost like a privileged kind of middle class. As a middle class person, I can't really complain in that sense. I mean, I think that capitalism is culturally deadening in all kinds of ways, like I said earlier. But that's not, that's compared to the kind of exploitation of, the profound immiseration of working class people. My qualms are irrelevant. But if we look at the system as a whole, if we look at kind of cultural critiques of the system, I still hold them to be true. But that's not necessarily.
So let's talk about exploitation, like now.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, I mean, if you are employed, you're expected to be there at a certain time and leave at a certain time. And I agree with you. I think it's sort of like partial slavery.
Well, no, but I know you can imagine.
But I think being a citizen anywhere in the world where you pay taxes is partial slavery too.
Yes, it's not that. I mean, again, I don't think I'm the person to mount it full-blooded defense. I'm not.
It's a discussion.
I know what I'm saying. As a discussion. So then exactly. So what I'm saying is again, socialism is not about the envisioned socialist utopia is not about having no responsibility and not being required to be at work at any. It's not about that. It's about the particular exploitive relations of modes of production and of
right.
these. So these are separate. So what I'm saying is these arguments, these kind of debates, are not necessarily. Almost all Twitter debates miss the point. Miss the fundamental.
Well, yes, of course.
I mean, you have to actually look at what the arguments about kind of patterns of exploitation. Patterns of the way the particular nature of the relationship between workers and the holders of the means of production, or whatever. However you want to characterize this, whatever your framework is. So, a socialist world is not a world without work, but it's a world in which work is, where owners own their labor.
Sure.
So that, to me, is...
So is it a world of, single operator businesses? Sort of.
No. I mean, you could be you could be a worker for a state, for whatever it is, a collective. I mean, the idea is that ultimately, you'd want the people to determine... you'd want the people to determine the nature of things. The state would,
sure.
The Leninist idea of the state withering away. Anyway, these are all complex, abstract concepts. What I'm saying is, it's not about not working. It's not about working less.
That's not my argument.
No.
I'm just asking.
What I'm saying is, you might still then be required. You might, to be at work.
There's still duties imposed upon you.
Well, whatever. Well, I mean, who knows? Who knows how these things might be configured? Maybe.
So it hasn't been tried yet.
Either labor is, the idea is that labor would no longer be alienating. That you would, these kind of questions. So these are a lot more subtle questions. What I'm saying is, you can't. Yeah, these are subtle questions that actually require attention from the critics. These lazy right-wing critics have no conception of what it is they're actually critiquing. This reductive idea that socialism is about, everyone being the same, which is nonsense. I mean, that's just not the idea. Is the
politically the same, right? I mean, that was the fundamental appeal of the Soviet Union, right? Equality.
Yeah, equality is a good thing, but that's different from I mean, that's a liberal. That's a liberal. I mean,
it was economic equality, not just equality under the law.
But it's more than that. It's not just a question of economic equality and that everyone has to have the same amount of money. Who cares? The problem with the billionaire class is not that they have more money; it's the exploitative nature of the relationship. If that somehow wasn't exploitative, if we could have, I could somehow envision a society where, I'm just speaking as some dude now, but I could envision a society where we have rich people and poor people and whatever, you can elect, the nature of that relationship isn't exploitative and alienating in the way that it is now.
Okay.
This idea of class envy, that not wanting billionaires to exist is just a question of class envy is nonsense. If rich people want to go off, I can imagine a society in which you can elect to be rich in all kinds of ways, not elect to be, but there's and investments you take. But what I'm saying is that's not the problem. The exploitative nature of the way that these relations are configured now is not just a question of people not having the same amount of money or having you could.
Sure.
We'd like to see diversity of human flourishing presumably requires autonomy in a way that will lead to diversity. I mean, I don't think anyone doesn't want to see that.
Yeah. So the goals are similar.
In fact, it's
the method is different.
Libertarianism is capitalism. It's deadening. We all have to comply. This is a deadening. Comply. You've seen every cliched 90s slacker movie about how going to the workplace is so it's not a question of how much you have to work or how hard you have to work or collective contributions or whatever it is. It's about the kind of deadening effect of the neoliberal workplace, of the way our politics is structured, of the way culture is structured. I mean, that's
sure.
Seeing I'm going this tirade. I mean, this is why another hilarious thing is when you see right-wing bloggers talking about cultural Marxists. Talking about the Frankfurt School is wanting popular culture. I mean, we're talking about a bunch of elitist snobs who kind of saw all pop culture as kind of entangled in capital. These are the opposite of people who just want the deadening sameness of mass culture. These are the most trenchant critics of this culture, this mass culture.
Right.
So let's
talk about the exploitative way. The exploitative. What did you say? Exploitative?
Oh, who knows?
You said billionaires have exploitative. The billionaire class.
Mm-hmm.
How is Mark Zuckerberg exploiting? Is he exploiting everyone, or just people that work for him? What is that how is that relationship formed? No,
but I mean, not Mark Zuckerberg. I mean, we talk. I mean, I really don't.
Or Bill Gates, or whoever.
Or whoever it is. Yeah. No. I mean, it's not.
Either is
the actual is
the problem
I can't explicate now
that money equals power. Is that the problem? More money equals more power.
Well, that's
capital power
that is
and social power.
Certainly that's problematic, but that's a very high-level kind of thing to say. Like, what? I mean, that's vague. What does that even mean? You'd have to really then flesh out.
I'm trying to get to the basis of your argument.
No, what I'm saying is I'm not really presenting an argument because right. I'm telling you what I think.
Okay.
But if you actually want me to kind of explicate, like, you know, various socialist accounts of like how labor is exploited, like, there's no, you know, firstly I'm not qualified to do that, but secondly, like, these are complex. This is not something that's kind of reducible to a slogan.
But that's the thing. Sorry, Simon. That's the thing about the left, though.
Yeah.
It's very complex.
Mm-hmm.
It is complex. Okay, you just said it.
No,
you know,
okay, fair enough.
These ideas
no, okay, because let's make it uncomplicated.
These
There's
ideas
poor people that,
yeah.
you know, people, you know, look at the nature of, okay, yeah, fair point. No, that's a fair point. So
sure.
look at the fact that how ideological so much of what is taken as just common sense is. Look at how economics over the last, you know, half century, even kind of is not necessarily kind of so policy doesn't necessarily reflect economic consensus, of academic economic consensus, but there's a kind of policy that's taken as common sense. You read Business Day, you read any major newspaper, to be taken seriously.
We need growth.
You can't have the minimum wage slip below a certain amount. You know, kind of, you have to encourage FDI. Certain things will just be absolute. These are things that have become entrenched as common sense since the neoliberal turn. But I mean, you know, the kind of repeal of Keynesianism. So 2008 was an interesting moment because it should have been, you know, if you remember, there were all these articles about is this the end of capitalism? Capitalism's over.
Yeah.
And of course, 3 months later, it was business as normal.
Sure.
It certainly radicalized. I don't know if radicalized is even the right word. I don't think it's the right word. What it did was open the eyes of, you know, a generation of people who would have been, and this is in the kind of elite first world. I mean, people in the kind of global south have never had, like ambitious, intellectually curious people in the global south have never been blinkered from these realities. But I mean, you know, it's like a literary kid in like Brooklyn, you know, would have continued to just write, you know, first person short story, you know, like, macho prose short stories. But I think that the dynamics of, and I think this is also the appeal of kind of Marxism and Marxist influence kind of scholarship to those kind of people, is that it has this great explanatory power. But again, I'm kind of evading the question. You're saying to put it in simple terms, let's just look at...
I don't know.
Okay, so what I was going back to was the fact that these are kind of common sense. So the way that the world we inhabit here, you know, in South Africa, for example, you look at how, apartheid geography still exists, you know, in many ways.
Yep.
People have to, poor people have to take a minibus taxi, wake up at 5 a.m, travel to work, earn your 8,000 rand a month. If you're lucky, 2,000 rand. What were cleaners at Wits getting paid? 2,000 rand a month. I mean, but the idea is we were told there is no alternative. You know, the famous Thatcherite slogan. That's this kind of the hegemony of these kind of ideals.
Yeah.
You know, the fact is there are policies that could have helped poor people, that could have reduced inequality, that may have seen greater growth in other ways. But we were told, no, it's impossible. This can't be done. This is not tolerable. The only way to help everyone is through the application of these kind of, clear-cut neoliberal policies. And they didn't work, and they're continuing not to work.
Well, we haven't had growth though, so we don't know.
Well, 2008 was a catastrophe. Look at the Eurozone crisis.
Sure.
Look at these various, and then also.
But
also, hold on. I just want to. When 2008 happened, what I found an interesting kind of liberal trope was people acting as if it was unforeseeable. 2008 was a black swan event that couldn't be seen. Oh,
the greatest.
What do experts know? There's no such thing as expertise anymore. We just have to kind of shrug. But actually, there were people who foresee that.
Yeah.
That's what I was saying earlier, like some libertarians, but also...
Nicholas Taleb.
Well, yeah. So but also a bunch of, like a lot of the kind of Marxist accounts of how the economy worked clearly not predicted 2008, but crisis became... so Taleb's worth mentioning because he as he characterizes a black swan as something that could not be anticipated, for which then kind of retroactive explanations are given.
Sure.
Whereas 2008, there may not have the New Left Review may not have printed articles saying, oh, there's a particular crash coming next year, but they made the crisis comprehensible. It makes sense within the framework, and they anticipated a crisis of some sort, and also also anticipated the way that financialization was going to be integral to that crisis. So, I mean, if the argument is that capitalism as we know it is working just fine, well, I mean, it isn't, and there are.
But look, I mean, I don't think anyone agrees that capitalism is working just fine, unless you are part of that elite group within the state, within the government, and you're at Davos.
Or you write to the business day. I mean, but then again, so that's why I'm talking about this need then to say, oh well, we were all wrong. What do we know? There's no such thing as expertise, rather than looking for alternative explanations. What is the ideological motivation for saying, oh, we can't look at alternative explanations? Alternative explanations that actually challenge, the status quo, that challenge the hegemony of the Chicago School, or whatever it is, the elite consensus, basically.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, why 2008 in particular, though? I mean, there's been, is it just because you were?
No, I think that was the galvanizing.
That's the biggest one within your lifetime.
I'm giving you an account of why I think that young people, like, if you want to talk about other crises, I'm not a historian. I can't. Sure. I can't give you a kind of expert account of, crises, because obviously the interwar year or the post-World War II years are important, and the differences, between, the repeal of regulation between then and the neoliberal turn, and, these are all interesting questions. And then, if we look kind of, I mean, someone like Giovanni Arrighi takes a much longer look at the way that capital is structured, through empires, and it's very interesting, but I'm not the person to kind of give you an account of.
So, trick question: Has real socialism been tried yet? Through state.
I'm not sure what that. I'm not sure what that means. I mean, because I'm not sure why that's what that's saying. I've just said to you that Marxian explanations can diagnose the problems of capitalism. So now, if you want to now tell me that Venezuela is a failing state, I'm not sure what that has to do with anything I've just said.
I haven't mentioned Venezuela, but yes.
But I'm saying this rhetorical move is interesting, because it's like this deadening. Oh, I see. So Venezuela's an absolute shambles. Therefore, Robert Brenner's account of like financialization, like, okay, like, I'm like, whatever.
Because here's the thing, though. I mean, people who have called themselves socialists, self-described, Hugo Chavez. Hugo Chavez, perfect example. Nationalized a whole lot of things for the interest of the people. Yeah. Did quite a few good things.
Lots of good things.
A lot of good things.
A lot of good, giving autonomy within communities.
Right.
There's a lot of good stuff.
But pegged to the value of oil.
Yeah. So but the point is, firstly, radical change is always risky, and it's not just left-wing change that is radical. You could have, like all kinds of market destruction. That can be imposed and can be disastrous.
Sure.
I mean, look at Chile. Look at.
Well, yes, okay, fine, but here's a socialist who try to control every aspect of the state.
What do you mean by try to control every aspect?
Well, he nationalized.
Let's not forget about how awful
sectors.
Also Venezuelan society, elite Venezuelan society was before Chavez. There's a reason he was as popular as he was.
Well, he was seen as an outsider.
Not only. What I'm saying is, ordinary Venezuelans despised, the elite ruling class.
So they elected the new elite in.
Well, whatever. I mean, okay. I mean, you're talking about problems with
within statism. Yes.
Yeah, there's all kinds of problems.
Yeah, sure. But why is it that whenever there is, I'm just going to use Chavez as an example. Mm-hmm. Whenever a socialist gets into power, they try to get more state control of resources, industries, impose more laws. It's almost like trying to create.
What do you mean by more laws, then? Because what do you? I mean, this idea of like a big state and a small state.
Yeah.
I mean, you have a lot of state power and state force going into enforcing supposedly free markets,
Oh, absolutely.
I mean,
absolutely.
I'm not on the one hand, it makes sense. A lot. A socialist government would want to kind of impose control over aspects of the state. I mean, that makes sense. I mean, it's not surprising.
But how does that help human flourishment? What is the long-term goal? Because,
well, I can't tell you what Chavez's long-term goal was. But I mean, if you could. So, like I said, it wasn't just about Venezuela. It wasn't just about centralization. It was also about giving autonomy to communities within Venezuela. I'm certainly not here to defend. Certainly not the current. Venezuela government or Chavez, but I mean, I think it's interesting to watch. When Chavez was still around, there was no way to get any kind of objective accounts. You watched you'd watch kind of anti-American TV, and Chavez was the greatest leader in the world, and you'd watch CNN, you'd watch Fox, watch
greatest
Chavez is
dictator in the world
devil,
ever seen. Which is both of which are wrong. It just seems that, for me, the fundamental problem with the world, perhaps the world is state power, as opposed to people trying to trade with each other within that state power.
Oh, sure. So we need states to be democratically accountable. You want states to be accountable, and that's
I want them not to exist. Firstly,
okay, well, maybe I'm not whatever. Okay, cool. But what I'm saying is, like, the current status is that state power is determined by elites as opposed to people.
Right. Let's talk about the elites now.
Okay.
So when you talk about elites, are you referring to bureaucracies and supporters of political parties and major newspapers?
But I mean, I guess I'm talking about rich people, basically. What
there
I'm
you
talking
go.
about is people. Yeah, no, that's fine. What I'm saying is bureaucracies don't exist. I mean, these are not. I mean, I'm obviously giving you a kind of, reductive cartoon version of the actual dynamics within state. But I think also we're getting into kind of another trap here, where we're like, of social media discourse. Here we are, not historians, not economists, and we're discussing this minute technical aspect of like what power means. And I think especially in South African Twitter, again and again and again, we've got these like fake philosophical debates about, like, for example, free speech. Instead, we never look at the dynamics of situations. It's just a question of slogans. Free speech is important, or is overriding.
It is important, though.
Sure, but why?
Yes, we had this conversation before.
Yeah.
Because that's how progress is made.
Maybe. I mean, if you're going to take an instrumental view of free speech, then you have to look at what it means in any particular case. But no one does. I mean, South Africa, you've got these these slogans, these positions, and then you don't have. So I was thinking about why this would be, and I think that a lot of the questions that appear to be like questions of identity or questions of principle are not. What they are kind of. I think the failure to make reparations in South Africa has led us to a position where we can only. So we basically, South Africa is this jerry-rigged compromise. So what we can only really do is debate. So that's why we've been forced. I find it interesting that kind of rich white people despair at all this kind of identitarian discourse, as they would call it.
Okay.
The fact that we have to revert to identity is a compromise. Is a fact that that's the only plane on which one can actually argue. I mean, they weren't. Imagine South Africa had been equalized. Imagine there'd been reparations after apartheid. Instead of because also white South Africans keep saying that they're tired of guilt. They're tired of being made to feel guilty. Well, that was the compromise. The TRC was a question of guilt and redemption, and this discourse that we created is a discourse of guilt. That was chosen. That was the elite compromise. That we talk about guilt, then actually, instead of actually making reparations.
Yeah.
If South Africa had actually been equalized.
What do you think reparations would have done?
Well, so let's assume. I mean, I'm not
Sure.
saying this would be easy, but let's assume that South Africa that we'd because.
So there's universal basic income for black South Africans, or of some sort.
I don't know, whatever. But the point is, all wealth accumulated under apartheid is illegitimate. I mean, do you agree with that, or?
Not all of it. I mean,
why not?
Because black wealth increased as well.
Yeah, well,
Under
so,
the,
to what extent?
Yes, low base. No, don't get me wrong. I'm not.
90% of wealth accumulated under apartheid is entirely illegitimate.
Sure.
Now imagine that would have been
But
redistributed.
illegitimate. It's.
Well, why not? I mean,
It's
the wealth that
difficult.
Nazis accumulate. I mean, it's it was an evil regime. There's nothing defensible about the apartheid regime.
Sure.
There was any contract enforced by the apartheid regime. How is that defensible? How can that still hold? How can any political conduct, any economic conduct under apartheid be defended, be considered legitimate? How can any accumulation of wealth be considered legitimate? But anyway, let's just assume for one second.
No, interesting thought. Yeah.
Assume that reparations, that there was total reparations, that all that money was redistributed, could have been in different ways. Let's just say there was a total equalizing of wealth in South Africa. At that point, because the DA, liberal, there's old school liberal types always talking about equal opportunity society, reverse discrimination. How can we have, affirmative action, this reverse, that identifying people by race is an apartheid tactic, which, there's something to be said for that, but it's the compromise that we're left with. If South Africa had actually been made an equal society, then you'd say fine, everyone's equal if you're qualified for the
But
job.
equal in terms of wealth.
Sure, whatever resources, yeah.
Sure.
But that means also access to schooling. It means, the fact is, the jerry-rig compromise we've got is that, wealth remains concentrated like it was. You go to your private school, it's not, and then, oh shame, you occasionally have to be told to feel guilty, and you don't get preferential job selection. I mean, in terms of the recourse for a world historical crime, identity conflict was the compromise chosen by elites. And it's as simple as that.
Right. Yeah.
So,
most South Africans did not vote for the TRC.
The alternative would have been. What I'm saying is the best thing that ever happened to white people in terms of protecting their privilege was this compromise, this elite compromise. It was done for
Yeah.
Because the alternative was, it was this idea that there was no alternative. You had to, that it would have been the end of South Africa's economic success. It would have seen South Africa, whatever the arguments were. I'm saying, this guilt-based, identity-based argument that we've got, this is the best thing that ever happened to white people. I love this statistic, this meme that you see again and again of how, whatever it is, 10% of the people in South Africa are paying 90% of the tax.
Sure.
As if,
well, there's reparations in some way.
No, what I'm saying is people are acting as if they're somehow being exploited as tax. People are not paying tax are still making productive contributions to the economy. A lot of them, people who don't reach the threshold to pay tax. That's a statistic about concentration of wealth. It's not a question. It's not a statistic about the exploitation of the elite. It's a statistic about how wealth remains concentrated.
No,
which is not to
sense.
say there aren't poor white people. Whatever it is,
No, that makes sense. I think I agree with you there.
Yeah.
I don't think it's sustainable to only have that pool of people paying tax in full for a very long time.
Well, I agree with you, but that's because.
And it's a concern that the rate of absorption into the tax bracket is very slow.
Yes,
it's a huge concern because we have no growth.
Yeah. No, I'm not anti. I'm not
so you
anti-growth
agree.
per se.
I'm trying to use all the jargon of the elites.
Well, currently we are in the worst of all worlds. We have this whole, in the way that the Zuma regime managed to kind of, successive downgrades by rating agencies for no good reason. It's one thing if you're going to kind of piss off the rating agencies for some kind of grand, progressive package that they would find intolerable.
Right.
But what we've got is your standard basket of, whatever,
deplorable policies. But someone like Pravin Gordhan, he is a communist. He calls himself
tweeting
one.
about how he's a communist.
He was a member of the Communist Party for a while, and he was
his policies are
He said, I know, but that's my question.
Yes. Yeah.
The Communist Party of South Africa is not communist. They're only communist in name.
Well, if you were to go speak to them, they'd give you good.
Before they rush off to the Mercedes-Benz 7 Series.
Well, again, there's no reason why. This is another great.
Communists can be.
You're a communist. What are you doing, tweeting in your iPad? There's no. Being a socialist doesn't mean you don't like things.
So is there a viable left? Is there a viable left
in South Africa
institution or organization or anything like that in South Africa?
What I also find interesting is how kind of white liberal, white left-wing dudes in cardigans studying at elite East Coast universities are instinctively dismissive of the EFF. I think the EFF is very exciting. I think there's a lot to be. What are the internal disciplinary process of the EFF? What might they become? There's a lot to be wary of. But I think the EFF is an exciting party, and I think they show what's possible.
I just think they want to increase state power. That's why I oppose them. And
I'm not sure what that means.
Well, increase state power. I think they will become dictatorial.
Why? Why them specifically?
Because all their heroes are, and they keep mentioning who their heroes are.
Such as?
Hugo Chavez was a hero for a long time. Mugabe was a hero for a long time. Thomas Sankara is still a hero, I think, of this. But he died too soon to make a terribly lasting impact on Burkina Faso.
What's this question of increasing state power? What's the difference between the way
because that's
state power? In terms, I don't mean the difference.
Because that's a disproportionate power relation right there. Citizens and the state.
No, but what I'm saying is, as opposed to who isn't trying to impose state power. So, for example, neoliberalism. I think libertarians sometimes say good things about this, even though they miss the kind of the bigger picture about. The sociology of power. But neoliberalism is a state construct also. When we talk about state power, the state enforces the current economic regime. The state enforces capitalism. The state enforces state power. You're just simply saying Chavez increases state power. Who reduces state power? And what is state power? Who makes citizens more autonomous? If increasing state power means increasing protections for individuals, in a way that's democratically accountable, that sounds great. Sounds awesome. I mean,
even if it's not democratically accountable, though, something like
minimum wages.
Like something like Singapore, right? Not the most democratic nation in the world. Okay, but they're very capitalistic. So I assume.
But hold on. But that's a good. So then suddenly this idea of do you really worry about state power per se? Again, is this even a question about principles, or is this a question of just configurations that you like? Because this is again the thing where people on the internet think they're talking about these grand philosophical abstractions. You're not. You're talking about, well, not you, but one is not. One is talking about configurations of power or policies that one likes. And so. I mean, if you like Singapore, people like
not
people,
particularly.
A lot of people like state power when it
suits them. Yeah, of course.
When it
no, of course. No, but I think all state power is illegitimate.
Okay, but
as a principled anarchist.
I know, but what does that really mean? I mean, but seriously, what's the difference? Because I'm saying you're saying specifically your problem with the EFF is they're going to increase state power, as opposed to. As opposed to the DA.
Well, yeah, but the DA
is also going to increase state power. But
they're going to increase state power for you to change your fucking rubbish bins, right? Plastic in here, glass in here. That's the DA's power. EFF is going to be no, we're going to expropriate every single piece of land in the country.
So you don't like the
including
policy of expropriation. But I mean, again, so
including land owned by black people.
So
right?
So again, the thing about these, I find interesting these criticisms of decolonizing education, land redistribution. So these are huge problems, and any radical, any intervention that isn't well thought out, well planned, is obviously going to be disastrous.
Sure.
But that is not. But people make that. People use that as a way of evading the more fundamental question of whether these things are legitimate or not. Is it right to decolonize education? Is the state of education in South Africa acceptable? Is this kind of, let's call it a Eurocentric mode of it, however you want to characterize it? I would say that it is incredible, that it's bad, it needs to change. Now, now if you were to come to me and say, oh, well, just imposing a blanket policy of decolonization is going to be disastrous. Yeah, probably. I mean, you could say that to any major change, any radical change.
Absolutely. No, I agree with you.
But that's again, it's being used simply to evade the more fundamental questions. Do we need land reform in South Africa? I mean, I would say we do. Yeah. Is just expropriating land without a plan going to work? No, it'll be an absolute disaster. Does that mean we just put the issue to rest?
But why not actually just give land to those who already live on it, or give title to those who already live on it?
Well, now we're just talking details. I don't know. I mean, let's defer to the land economy. The
Ingonyama Trust, right? I mean, the Zulu king through sheer crony nepotism with the governing party owns how many millions of hectares of lands with hundreds of thousands of people on it.
Yeah.
Why don't just give the wealth to the people, literally, by allowing them to have the piece of land in which they reside on? That's land reform.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, maybe. I don't,
maybe.
No, what I'm saying
what
is...
do you mean maybe? That's fucking true.
I
give
agree.
Title... They will be wealthier.
I agree, but what I'm saying is, okay, that doesn't resolve the. Yeah, sure, that sounds good to me.
Okay, as a first step.
Yeah, it sounds good to me, but I'm saying, okay, that's just an example.
So, what are the big problems with land reform that needs to be resolved?
No, again, let's defer to actual. These are not questions simply of principle. We can't resolve this. This is an incredibly complicated question.
Yeah, but everything's complicated with you, Simon. I just want glib answers that I can put on YouTube with Simon smashes Ramon.
I get that, but what I'm saying is, so I think my larger point is being lost, which is that I'm saying I'm still trying to make the point that people evade grasping with these actual issues. Let's take a look at it. Let's see what it actually entails by the kind of by this blanket statement of the mere fact that the point of their complicatedness is almost kind of implied by opponents. It's like opponents of decolonizing education. Well, first they'll laugh at the very concept, even though they've never looked at any of the literature about this stuff, the various meanings that this could have. But
it's difficult to read.
Sure, and yet that doesn't stop people from acting as if they know what they're talking about, acting as if, calling students idiots, as if students have always, students are impulsive, and that's students, with throughout history.
So you are saying, back to the EFF.
Yes.
So do you think they are sort of getting to be, they're not quite a viable
organisation
of the left, but they could be.
No, but what is the left? I mean, again, so what I'm saying,
Well,
there's a lot of
someone who
wants, I personally, as I say,
for you,
here I'm gonna differ from like I said, the bearded white radical in a cardigan. I think the EFF have done amazing stuff. I think they're not unproblematic. No one's unproblematic.
Sure.
And again, what are the internal disciplinary structures? How do what's going to hold? There's a lot of questions one would ask.
Yeah.
With a new party.
I mean, the thing with me, I don't trust like a group of people to do something that does. How can I explain? I don't trust people with that much power.
Which people? I mean.
Oh, anywhere from Julius to Helen Zille to Jacob Zuma.
Okay, so what you're saying is like political processes shouldn't exist at all. I mean, if you're saying
or we can make them a bit more different. Just devolve power to the provinces would be a good start.
How does that help? And what's the difference?
Well, you know exactly where the provincial premier stays, so you can go lynch him if things go wrong.
Sure, but I mean, realistically, like at what point, if you're talking about like autonomy at some point you've got to have things that work. But again, now you're evading the question of whether the EFF themselves are viable or not. Like if you're not into like politics at all, if you just want to see the withering away of the state, that's a whole other separate question from whether, in terms of our politics, the EFF can be an emancipatory force. I think in many ways they can be. Is there potential for them to also be destructive? Yeah, sure. I mean,
so do the ends justify the means, or does it depend on the ends?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure.
Does it depend on the means rather?
And, I mean, is that a question that are you asking me from my kind of meta-ethical orientation?
Oh, no. Okay,
so
if we take land reform, for example, and say they expropriate land of everyone, somehow they're able to do so, I don't know how, including black people who for the first time in generations have managed to own land.
Yeah.
And then somehow they do something very benevolent with that land. Mm-hmm. And then utilitarian says everyone's better off. Is it
like
worthwhile?
This is like a weird like Sam Harris counterfactual. I mean, are sweatshops worth having because capitalism will ultimately, alleviate poverty rates? I mean,
well, to the people there, perhaps.
I can't answer that weird counterfactual. Like, I don't think it tells us anything. I'm not sure. Like you're asking me about. It's not how these policy questions work.
No, but I mean, if you want your goal, which is the autonomy of the individual.
Yeah. Not only, but I'm saying.
One of your goals.
Yeah.
And and the process to that involves suffering. Does it depend on the suffering, or is the goal that important?
No, but I mean now you're asking me like an abstract question, like a meta-ethical question, or a kind of question of normative ethics. You're asking me, like, I mean, it's such a non sequitur in terms of like this policy discussion. I mean, do the ends justify the means? That could be equally applicable to any policy direction we choose. I mean,
sure.
It's a red herring. I'm not sure why that's relevant. If you're asking me that, it's a separate question of like how ethics works. I don't know, like whatever. That's.
Well, you study philosophy. I never studied philosophy, so when you say ethics, I don't know what you mean. I do actually. Okay, so the EFF could be the viable organisation of the left.
There's a lot I like about the EFF. Have you been to an EFF rally?
I don't go to rallies. I'm not a political person.
They're incredible. They're incredible. The energy, the solidarity, they're incredible.
So are Nazis. I'm joking.
No, but I mean the aesthetic of fascism. No, but that is not something to. I mean, the aesthetic of fascism is something to think about. I mean, why fascism would be compelling is not a mystery. But not all. That's.
They had great uniforms.
Well, Hugo Boss was on point, but that's
Indeed.
whole other.
Indeed.
Whole other.
No, but I don't get like these cult of personalities. Like I find it strange.
Yeah,
I think that deadens individual autonomy.
Sure, I don't disagree with you.
I don't know. So even like someone like Julius.
Yeah.
Do you think he?
Well, he's charismatic.
Yeah.
It's compelling. I mean, when you say cult of personality, it depends what you mean. Do you mean is it useful to have a charismatic leader? I mean, undoubtedly. Is it dangerous for a party to kind of revolve around one charismatic? Sure. Yeah. I mean, there's no question about that. But again, that seems like a pretty obvious point. I mean,
yeah, for everyone.
Yeah.
All right. So do you? What is your opinion on what people on my side call the social justice warriors, and what you call identity? Look at their face.
Oh my God!
I knew that would happen.
It's firstly, I mean, it's just so like, oh God. I mean.
But back to your point about identity. So you said that's the last What did you say it was? The
I said
last
it's the
thing
plane on
people
which
have.
well, I'm speaking specifically in the South African context, and obviously my explanation doesn't exhaust everything. What I'm saying is people are forced to kind of, so like black nationalism, for example, is an incredibly powerful, galvanizing kind of movement.
Yeah.
But other forms of identity kind of protest are required because that's the only kind of reform that's possible. So there's an argument, some critics of kind of so-called identity, whatever the hell identity politics is, if it means one thing, will say, some kind of leftist critics will say that it's kind of buying into neoliberalism. It's kind of, it's not actually radical. But I would say, perhaps there's something to that. But again, these are not one-size-fits-all explanations. But also, I would say that it's the only plain, it may be that it's not fighting against kind of the kind of distribution of power, but I would also say that sometimes that's what you've got, and you've got to fight with what you've got. And in South Africa, it's impossible to enter the sphere of kind of the public sphere without in any other level, on any other terrain. You have, claims have to be kind of identity based sometimes. I'm saying this is a compromise that we've made.
But why?
Social justice work, what do you mean to be social justice? Like, again, so like sometimes you've got really you just got dudes just speaking, like some guy, his parents' basement talking about how the Frankfurt School is likes Britney Spears. Like what, there's all nonsense. But if you want to say that there's hypocrisy, amongst.
Okay, let me give you my ideas.
Yeah.
It's a very, to me, it appears to be learnt theory that is not available to 90% of the world population.
Okay, but
no one. I don't think anyone. Okay, I'm not going to make absolute statements, but I don't think people have this epiphany one day about their identity. I think most people don't.
Okay, but so
care
what are we talking about
specifically? Identity politics, whatever that means, right?
Yeah, well, what does it
students.
mean? In this case,
I don't know what it means.
We're talking about, let's say in the South African context.
Yeah.
Okay, so who are these evil social justice warriors?
No, they're not evil.
No, okay, well, who are they? Who are they?
Well, if you see, okay, so when Rosemont's Fall was happening, right? So you had a lot of people, and they use these terms. Black pain was one of them. Black bodies was another.
Yeah.
Black excellence was another.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. It sounds like an effective. Why wouldn't?
Is it code words? Okay,
It's not code. But if you're so mystified, why not ask? No one ever asked. That was an incredible account.
I get blocked on Twitter.
Well, what I find amazing is you'd read all these, these accounts of how these students are basically the rise of fascism on South African campuses. What they mean by these statements is basically, it's like, well, why not ask the students? No one ever did. No one unsympathetic. No one, complained about the social justice warrior, identitarian fascists ever stopped to kind of try and figure out what people are actually saying.
But I think a lot of these ideas are emulate from educated middle class people. I don't think it's a galvanizing force for some lower classes.
Okay, but
throughout the country, right? I don't think people in Limpopo.
That isn't but that's an interesting question. That's an interesting question to think about.
Yeah.
On the other hand, so there were, look at the student protests and look at how students had kind of outside of the elite universities, then complained and said, look, we've been protesting for years. Why is it that you only, pay attention when it's Wits and UCT? Very reasonable question.
Sure.
The students themselves, I went to a few Wits rallies and incredible. Again, so these evil fascists, I went to these rallies, some of them, just to watch. And they were unbelievably, the sense of unity, the sense of solidarity, the sense of
because you agreed
empathy.
with them.
No,
the Keep Wits Open group
not to me, they don't know who I was.
But the Keep Wits Open group had they walked from West Campus to Senate House, and they were sworn at and done all sorts of things too. So once there's opposition, the solidarity falls away very quickly.
No, that's a reasonable
okay, it's beside the
thing
point
to think about. What I'm saying is they themselves drew attention to. So, obviously a lot of ideas are elite ideas.
Yes, there you go. Elite ideas. I should have just said that. They appear to be very elite ideas.
Some of them are, some of them are not.
Okay.
Are Fanon's ideas elite ideas? In a sense, they're the product of an elite education. Are you saying students can sometimes be glib and just pick up slogans? Sure, students have always done that.
But why do we need to pay...
So do right-wing social media commentators.
Sure. Why are you pointing at me when you say that?
your friends, you and your buddies.
My one friend. But now, why do we have to think that this is like a true reflection of what they believe, and why do we need to pay attention to it?
Well, I'm not sure. I'm not really sure what you're asking me. Like,
I know, but you talk about identity and it's like the last thing that they have due to oppressive capitalism.
I'm not talking about so-called social justice warrior. I'm talking about in South Africa itself as a country. There's constant hand-wringing about race-based discourse, about how about the erosion of liberalism. So I'm not talking about students giving pointed economic slogans. I'm talking about the fact that we talk about we still talk how can affirmative action exist in a post-apartheid South Africa?
Yeah, well, I would say it applies to the majority only. Yeah, that's the only country where.
I mean, it is defensive. It is defensive. Well, yes, it's the only country where the majority is still like effectively, disempowered. I mean, so yeah, it does sound crazy on the surface, but it's easily defensible when you stop and look at the statistics. But why are we even in this weird position? And so my position was that we're in this position because of the failure to the failure to make reparations. So now we have to then have these hand-wringing accounts of how is it that young Mary and young Pitt, they worked so hard, they studied studied so hard, they should have gone to medical school, but their affirmative action meant that they were quotas. Like, how is that fair? I mean, on the surface you can see that, I mean, it is ultimately fair, it's justifiable, but why are we even in this position? We're in this position.
Well, you can say it's justifiable discrimination. You don't say it's fair.
Yes, it's fair.
Is it just semantics?
I would say not. I would say what's fair is if we actually lived in an equal opportunity society. That's never.
What does possible. Equal opportunity mean? Because it smells like bullshit to me.
Well, it is bullshit. I keep saying it. No, what I'm saying is I keep saying it because that's like the DA's famous line. That we need to live in an equal opportunity society.
I don't think anyone actually fundamentally believes that. Because no one gives up their position. Because what is equal opportunity? So it is you born.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you have. So it's a combination of genetics and social influences, right?
No, okay, look, so
everyone should have the right to go to university.
No, the idea is not everyone needs to be the same.
No, not the same. Have the same opportunities.
What I'm saying is, like, look at, this is supposedly the American dream. It's like, upward social mobility, you can be whatever you want. There was that statistic, I don't know, some bullshit, there's some statistic where, like, I don't remember what, the American dream is more achievable in Denmark, maybe, one of the Scandinavian countries.
Okay.
The idea, like, in terms of opportunities of for social mobility, I mean, there's no question that they exist more in some places than other places, but
freer places.
Yes, freer places like Denmark and Norway.
With robust private sectors.
Well, we can question again what that means. I mean, Germany also has a robust private sector.
Yeah.
But what's the difference between the German, the
hegemony?
Well, no, you're not wrong. I mean, in Europe.
Of course, I'm not wrong.
In Europe. I mean, so that's the thing. In many ways, German capitalism works well for German workers, but it's been a disaster for the Eurozone.
Very well, so.
But that's so that is an important question in terms of German growth. But
equal opportunity.
Equal opportunity.
That's bullshit, right?
So when I was pointedly saying equal opportunity society, because that's a DA slogan, equal opportunity society, and they use it also in a pointed way. They're talking about. They're using that in the negative sense of opposing these constraints on liberty, supposed affirmative action, BE or whatever. So what I'm saying
it is a constraint of sorts, right?
Sure.
But you're saying it's justified constraints.
Yeah, ultimately, of course, it's justified. But of course, affirmative action is justified. But what I'm saying is that, again, to go to my initial point, it's the compromise. White people should be fucking grateful for affirmative action as opposed to actual redistribution. The deserved, reparations, what should have happened. So if, that's why I'm saying this was the elite compromise. Like, oh, shame, you might not be first in line for medical. Oh, shame, like your, centuries of accumulated wealth remain intact.
So how long?
You might have to go to Harvard Medical School. Shame, I really feel for
that. Sounds like a real caricature.
Oh yeah, sure, but you know what I'm
I'm
not saying white people aren't, that there aren't impoverished white people.
But white people are still citizens of the country.
Okay.
They still have rights.
Yeah, sure.
They still. So, are you only talking about state privileges?
I'm not saying. So let's just rephrase this. I'm not saying white people. I'm not. I'm not.
You're not calling for genocide.
What I'm saying is, in terms of the like retribution is not the word I want, but
redistribution,
retributive justice,
right?
That should have occurred. Not even retribution. That's not what I'm saying. In terms in terms of what was justifiable, in terms of what would have been right, in terms of the reparative kind of, I guess is the phrase I'm looking for, reparative justice, that was, I would have said, correct, in the transition from, apartheid South Africa to supposedly post-apartheid South Africa. In terms of what could have happened, white South Africa managed to negotiate a pretty sweet deal.
We got off well.
Yeah.
Okay, not me. I'm half white only, and I only arrived in 91. So fuck it. I don't.
Okay. But you know what I mean.
Sure.
That's the point. I'm saying,
right.
So if I'm not saying. So I'm not dismissing. Like those Daily Mail articles. So then again, we can talk about like farm murders. Like the question is not, white farmers don't matter. Of course, there's a horrifying incidents. But the idea that crime affects South Africans. This is a disaster for all South Africans. This is not some special.
Sure.
Some special kind of.
But when the state is not at all interested in violence against citizens, interpersonal violence.
Yeah. Now you want the state to intervene.
No, I don't want it.
Yeah.
No, I don't want it. I think appealing to the state to protect you from malevolence is a bit ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
But
is it? I think that's the clearest role of the state, to protect their citizens. Do we really want look at private security in the suburbs, where you have suburban residents who can do whatever. You can drive home. You can drive home pissed out of your mind. You know that you're not going to be pulled over by your private security guard to It's not about. But what's going to happen is once.
I like my private militia.
Yeah, they're very nice to have if you're, don't get me wrong, very nice to have, very comforting, very reassuring.
Yeah.
Socially incredibly problematic.
In what way?
I don't know if we can have this whole conversation. This is a whole other, this is a whole other 3-hour conversation.
Yeah. But, they just happen to be there, and they're like, you sort of have to sign up if you live here. That's coercive.
Well, that's the libertarian dream, to be coerced by your body corporate rather than the state.
Yes.
Sounds like a nightmare. What a dystopian, what a nightmare. My God, I went to look at some private one of the giant estates where there's no totally centralized, just every bylaws.
Those are ghettos for white people.
So, but that's
I hate estates.
Yeah, obviously they're awful. But what I'm saying is this is what it devolves. I'd rather have, I would rather have a democratically kind of accountable centralized government than this libertarian nightmare.
So, is there any government in the world that you think sort of fits that mold in terms of democratic accountability?
I think, many countries are more accountable than others.
Sure. Yeah, but in general, is there one that you
I'm not going to
support?
I think that requires
it's
a degree
easy to say.
I can easily say countries that, are ranked where, this requires a level of kind of fine-grained detail that I can't give.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Because you say democratically accountable, what does it actually fundamentally mean?
Well, we can see what it doesn't. We can see when states can act, and we can see how when states act well. So that's also what's interesting is if you look at Brexit, for example. I think kind of right wing. There's a lot of left wing arguments for Brexit. I think that obviously
for Brexit. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jeremy Corbyn makes the best ones, and then he pretends he doesn't.
So Corbyn.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Corbyn's always supported Brexit.
Yeah.
But that doesn't.
Until it happened.
That's different from you can think the EU is ultimately, elite-orientated, undemocratic, hugely problematic, hugely destructive, but that's different from saying, well, Brexit's a good idea. Brexit's obviously destructive idea.
Yeah, they're not...
Obviously, suicidal, not suicidal, but obviously self-destructive.
Well, it's a curse of if they don't get fucked by the EU, they get fucked by their own government, so Britons don't win either way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, yes. Yeah.
But I think the concept of Brexit is good for them.
Well, the concept of Brexit,
for most people.
How is this going to be good for anyone? I'm not sure why we're talking about Brexit all of a sudden, but how is this going to be good for anyone?
What, Brexit? Well, supposedly more autonomy to the British people.
How?
Because the government's far more accountable because they're in London, not in Brussels.
Nonsense. There's frankly...
But then you have to trust the government in London. Who does that? No one.
Well, you vote for your government. At least you can... Look, there's... The fact of the matter... Sure, there's a lot of arguments you can make. There's a lot of problems with the... You should read Perry Anderson's stuff on the EU. Is very good.
Perry Anderson.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But... probably going to say that loud, but you know what I mean. But that's very different from, the actually self-destructive consequences of Brexit now. It's not giving more autonomy to anyone.
I think long term it will. Who knows? What are your views on? I don't know. Have you got somewhere to go?
What is the time?
Well.
It's going to be somewhere by about 1.
Okay, 10 more minutes.
Okay.
It's 22.
Okay.
There we go.
Yeah, that's fine.
All right.
Antifa. Probably push it to 1:30.
Okay. Antifa.
Yeah.
I look at Antifa like they're hooded. I get why they're hooded. They don't want to be seen by the cops and all that. You think the destruction of private property is perfectly legitimate way to protest?
It depends why.
Okay, Antifa. Okay, the G20, the G8 summit. I think they were there, and now they're like sort of attacking where like conservative speakers are going to speak, like someone like Milo or Ben Shapiro.
Yeah.
Well, they are. You saw the videos of Berkeley.
Mm-hmm.
People saying that Antifa, and they literally smashing the windows of the university, right?
Yeah. So is the question?
And they say that, and they call themselves left wing.
So is the question whether it's ever justified, or whether it's justified in these cases?
Yeah, in these cases, like someone speaking, do you think that's justified?
No,
Do you think speech is violence?
Do I think so? Yeah, it can be. Yeah, sure.
Really?
Yeah.
How?
Why not?
Like
what's the difference between a speech act and any other act? You know, we all agree that we can prevent some kinds of action. How is speech different?
How is speech different
from any other activity? What I'm saying is, you can't.
Well, you got physical action.
Sure.
Someone smashed you with a hammer in the face.
Yeah, okay.
That's violence.
Mm-hmm.
Someone saying, imagine getting smacked with a hammer in the face is not the same as getting smacked with a hammer in the face.
Right. That's true. But those are okay, sure. But that's
so when is it? How do you determine when it's violence or not?
It can certainly incite violence. It can certainly be destructive.
They can incite it.
Speech can be destructive.
Yeah, like when Julius tweeted that H&M will be sorry for what they did, and then they trashed the place.
Sure.
So is that speech violent?
Yeah.
Really?
Well,
what kind of people just who actually perpetrated the violence just have the autonomy to say, and we allow them the autonomy to say.
Well, we do. I mean,
they're not drones, right?
You can. I mean, if you incite violence, and you condemn someone for inciting violence, you're not saying that the people who were incited by that violence had no autonomy.
But do you think someone like Milo Yiannopoulos has violent speech?
I think he's a schmuck. I mean,
yeah,
the question whether it's violent or not.
He's funny.
I'm not sure what hinges on.
When he says there's no.
What hinges on the question. It's not funny. He's the most banal fucking dude. Well, not the most. There's a lot of people contending.
No, but people like go out and protest and smash windows because he's talking like.
Well, that may or may not be instrumentally useful.
But do you think his speech is violent?
I'm not sure what rests. I mean, because you're now like trying to kind of pass like exact meaning of what violence was. Like, I'm not like what rests on defining that. Like, what rests on that definition?
Oh, like if he.
Are you asking me if he's culpable for what he incites?
Well, he hasn't incited. No. So, for example, when he says something derogatory about the transgender community, or something like that, do you think Antifa's actions against that are justified?
I think it depends. I can't give a
blanket
depends.
Answer.
It depends. I can't give a blanket answer for that question. I mean,
I think people should be allowed to speak. You don't have to hit anyone if they speak.
Sometimes people can speak and it can be incredibly destructive. Should you prevent them or not? It depends. Depends what they're saying. Depends on the context. I mean, I don't think this is a. I mean, I think it's fairly obvious that this is not just a blanket answer.
I mean, hypothetically, if every time I said a word, someone in the world died. Yeah, okay, it makes sense for me to shut up. Right?
Well, that's an obvious, yeah.
But it doesn't happen that way.
No, but that doesn't. It doesn't.
So it's all contextual.
Yes, exactly. It's all contextual. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. I agree.
So you have no hard and fast answers for anything, Simon.
Well, not for the questions you're asking. Is it okay to punch a Nazi? Yes.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
But like one with. But then you have to define what a Nazi is. And a lot of
hard and fast answers. I'm giving you hard and fast answers.
But a lot of these, like, what nationalist types are Nazis?
Oh, fuck.
Like, Richard Spencer deserved to be punched in the face on camera.
Yeah.
Okay, no, he's a douchebag, but...
Yes.
What?
Yes.
So what? You're allowed to be a douchebag. If you're a free, autonomous individual, which you love...
You're allowed to punch him in the face.
Without repercussion.
Sure. Well, whatever. Repercussion could be another. Maybe. No, I'm not saying without repercussion. Maybe that person should have been arrested for assault, but that still doesn't mean it wasn't a bad thing to do.
So if
you know what? Yeah.
All right, but if I say then that someone on the left deserves to be punched in the face, would you?
I would disagree with you.
You see?
Yeah.
Double standard.
No.
Why?
Because Nazis are bad.
Commies are bad too.
I disagree. I mean, again, so this is where this is an important principle. You're like, I'm saying this is not, the abstract principle you seem to be arguing about is not the principle I'm arguing about. Right. I'm saying it's okay to punch Nazis because they're bad.
Okay.
And fuck them. and it's good to prevent them. It's good to discourage Nazis from being Nazis. I don't think it's bad to punch communists.
Or punching them in the face won't discourage them.
Might. If it
might
turns
not.
out in reality,
It might not.
If it turns out in reality that punching Nazis in the face is is likely to lead to a fascist government, yeah, sure, then we need to reconsider this tactic.
Yeah, I think you should reconsider it.
So whatever. The point is, what I'm saying is, again, this is why it's important to point out that the supposed dispute about principles is actually often a kind of hegemonic kind of tactic for evading actual discussion about tactics.
Really?
Yeah.
So
sometimes, not always, but
I'm
saying, we pretend that we're talking about the principles of free speech. Oh, it's really important. Free speech is really important until it's pro-Palestinian activists or whatever it is. Then suddenly now we have to keep these dangerous elements out. I mean, you're going to see this kind of hypocrisy all the time. The pretense that we're talking about abstract principles when what we're actually talking about is, I want my side to talk and you shouldn't disturb it.
But is it only, are you accusing the right of doing that or accusing everyone of doing so?
I'm sure it happens a lot, but I've seen it on the right.
Of course it happens on the right.
Yeah.
And it happens on the left too.
Sure.
So you call it out.
Phenomenon. I'm just talking about
phenomenon. Okay.
I'm talking about this. I'm saying a lot of what appears to be a debate about principle isn't. It's a debate about something else. Just again, like with these principles, like you're like, aha, I've caught the hypocrisy. It's okay to punch it. No, I'm not trying to say I've caught you out, but I'm saying there's in terms of standing back and understanding the structure of the argument. No, there's no hypocrisy there. My point wasn't about the general okayness of punching people you disagree with. It was that it's good to punch Nazis. That's a separate.
Well, as long as they admit to being. Well, as long as for sure they're a Nazi.
I mean, of course, yes, sure.
I mean, come on. People call Ben Shapiro a Nazi.
Yeah, he's just a schmuck.
The guy with the Yamaha, whose grandparents fled Germany or wherever.
Ben Shapiro's not a Nazi. He's a schmuck, but he's not a Nazi.
He's a schmuck sometimes. But he's fun.
I don't find him fun. I find him incredibly. Yeah, I mean, all these guys. That's why I really don't understand this. Jordan Peterson, Sam Harris, Ben Shapiro. These guys are so fucking banal, so unbelievably uninteresting. I don't understand. I can't understand.
Ooh, you just killed Jesus in front of me.
Sorry.
And now you're throwing shit in my face.
The Holy Trinity. I'm very sorry. Yeah.
Really, they're all banal. Okay, Sam Harris is banal. Jordan Peterson's interesting.
Is he?
But
I have to confess, I can't get through more than occasionally I thought, let me actually before I can't I've never been able to watch more than a minute and a half of any of these people's videos or whatever. They're just boring as well. Sam Harris, the guy who I don't want to dislike random people, but the guy who solved his old problem. The guy's anyway, whatever. It doesn't matter. Who cares?
So their popularity is just another reason why capitalism's shit. Is that it?
They kind of are the greatest kind of confirmation of the kind of Frankfurt School hypothesis.
So where to from here, Simon? Do you think there will be a radical shift
in South Africa? Well, it looks like the opposite now. If anything, it looks like our savior Cyril Ramaphosa is coming.
Can you believe it?
He will crack down, and there will be an anti-corruption drive, and there will be business confidence, and there will be increased centralization, and there will be some radical talks and gestures towards land reform and education, and there will be business as usual. Dembeki years without the kind of wild conspiracy theories. So no, not for now. But who knows? South Africa is unpredictable and strange.
But you think South Africa will be a lot better should there be some radical change? But then again, it depends on the nature.
I certainly think that as much so here I am like any other semi-reasonable South African, of course welcome how centrist overlords or in many obviously it beats the chaos of the Zuma years, like I said, the worst of all worlds. The Zuma years, which is business as usual with rampant corruption with. I mean, not that corruption hasn't existed prior, but at least it was acceptable, tolerable corruption. The kind of corruption the Davos crowd can live with, and not anti-business fake radical corruption.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, life under Cyril will definitely, is a better proposition than the chaos of the Zuma years, but that doesn't mean that that's my vision of, I think now more than ever, civil society, the leftist people have to really now the real fight begins.
The Section 27 needs to get its fucking act together now.
Yeah, now
properly.
under the of course we still have yet to see. We assume that Ramaphosa is going to entrench his power. We don't know. Who knows? Who knows what's still going to happen? I don't know how the next few years are going to play out. I don't know. The internal power dynamics of the ANC are incredibly opaque. To outsiders. I mean, I don't know. But the point is, now seems more than ever the time for the left, for people in general, for ordinary South Africans to actually now, the fight starts now.
Yeah, but what happens? Last question from our side. What happens if Cyril does well, according to whatever there's economic growth, and people are wealthier, and there are more jobs.
Yeah, that'll be good. That'll be better than there not being economic growth. Yeah.
Sure, but that diminishes the EFF's capabilities
Sure.
and support dramatically. What does it say about South Africans generally when, supposedly, if there's good economic growth, the left just doesn't seem to exist politically?
I mean, I'm not sure what the question is.
Oh,
I mean, you could.
There's no stomach for radicalism.
Well, people don't want to upset the status quo. When things seem to be going okay, people now just want.
But millions of people vote for the status quo, like all the time.
Okay.
So are they not brainwashed? But are you saying they're not as autonomous as they believe?
Are you asking me why millions of South Africans vote for the ANC every year? I mean, not every election. I can't answer that question. I'm not. I think we should go ask people why they vote for the ANC. I can't.
Every time there's economic growth, like the far left really just loses out.
Well, that's not surprising. I mean, that doesn't.
But if the ideas were so important, but they don't appear to be important. They don't have.
Well, they certainly don't appear to be important because again, there's these hegemonic ideas we were talking about in the beginning.
Or maybe they shit ideas and people don't like them.
Why would people start?
Could that be possible?
It could be possible. But what I'm saying is, what I'm saying is why.
Gotcha. End the interview.
Anything's possible. What I'm saying is the quality. How does the quality? How is people accepting the status quo more when they're under less financial pressure? Like, how's that a measure of the quality of, like, Marxian analyses of, like, world systems or whatever?
Yeah, maybe people are just satisfied with what they have, and radicalism is not really required.
I think
not that it discredits
I think
the far left, but it's not this galvanizing force.
Well, no, but I mean, obviously, people are going to be more. No, just like the extreme right flourishes in times of turmoil, in times of like relative stability. People think that the status quo is more tolerable than when it isn't. I mean, I don't think there's anything particularly noteworthy about that. But we might also say that the critiques of capitalism are not just critics of capitalism. Kind of mainstream economists will also see that crisis is built into the cycles of crisis. So, capitalist crisis is coming again. No matter who you believe, crises are recurrent. So, are left ideas suddenly good again when the crisis hits?
So it appears.
No, there's certainly more appeal. But what I'm saying is, the fact is, if you have an analysis that says that these crises are recurrent, and they are, okay, it's a good analysis. If it explains why, if it explains the dynamics, that's good. Like, I mean, surely the question is whether these ideas are true. Also, so and it seems that they're more true than many of the explanations.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, that's what counts, isn't it?
So there's truth in the world.
What does that mean?
Oh, I don't know. Nevertheless, Simon, thank you.
Thank you.
I don't know. I know that this is true. An interview did happen. Well,
the sentence that an interview did happen. Sure. That's different from like truth in the world.
Okay.
But that's a question for another time.
Who knows?
Yeah.
Nevertheless, thanks for joining me.
Cool. Thank you.
Cheers.
Cool.
How can you say what does that mean?
Well, what does it mean? The truth